In 2001, I entered an internet cafe to do an interview. And I was nervous. I was an S6 vacus. It was my very first interview in life. And I was seated across the table from this guy whose job it was to determine whether or not I would have a job over the entirety of my career. Sorry, of my secondary school. What am I saying? Vacation, not secondary school. To get here, I had made a call to a friend of my father's, who had made a call to another friend, who had made a call to another friend, who had made a call, and finally got me the interview. So the first question they asked me was the question I was hoping they wouldn't ask me. They looked straight in my eyes and says, "Have you been on the internet before?" And at that point, I knew the interview was done. I've started about 8 business ventures. I have created and set up 5 different brands. I've done multimedia, I have done web design, I have worked with 3D animation, I have worked with communities, I've worked with lots of clients. I think that over the course of my career, I have easily worked with more than 1,000 clients in one way or another. And I can confidently say that I have been able to impact the lives of millions of people in this country and across the continent in various ways, through mentorship, through training, through education, through brand development, through ideation, etc. But all of this started because of that one interview. So I was back in this interview, and I looked him straight in the eye and said, yes, I have been on the internet before. I know what the internet is. I have a lot of knowledge about the internet. And so they asked me questions about search engines. Just to tell you how old this was a time when Google was still a thing. Yahoo, Dogpile, Ask Jeeves, that's how old it was. And so I told them how to search for stuff on the internet. I told them how to open up email addresses. I told them how the websites worked. I told them what languages the internet ran on, and all sorts of things. And I answered with a lot of confidence, and I passed the interview. The truth is I had never been on the internet. I had seen the internet on TV back when CNN was calling it the information superhighway. I had seen it in magazines. I had seen it from a distance on the computer of the systems administrator at school. And he actually pointed and said, yes, this is the internet. But I had enough knowledge to know what the internet was and how it worked. And so I passed the interview. I got the job. And I spent the next 2 years of my life just absorbing everything there was to absorb about the internet. In that time, I learned how to program. I learned how to take apart hardware. I learned Unix systems. I learned web programming. I learned design. I taught myself robotics. I taught myself hardware development, etc. I basically just, whatever you could think of, I had a folder for it with tutorials and links to other web pages. At some point, I had to drop out of school, and my education continued on the internet. So everything that I've known since 2001 has been self-taught. I have never stepped back into a classroom. All the businesses that I start follow the same pattern. I learn about something, I get very infatuated with the idea, and end up spending sleepless nights just trying to absorb as much information as possible. And so what ends up happening is someone says, oh, you seem to be good at this. Can you do it? I'm like, yeah, I can do it. And then next thing I know, I'm getting a lot of clients. And I have to hire people because the clients are increasing. There's one problem with this, though. And this is the core element of my talk. Being at the cutting edge of technology, being the person who's doing research and coming up with passion ideas, meant that for the longest time, I was 3 to 5 years ahead of the local industry. Internationally, I was interacting with all these guys where, the world was moving on. But in Uganda, at a time when the fastest internet connection we could access as mere mortals was about 64 kilobytes per second. Who remembers those days of dial-up? With that sound? Yeah. So being at that cutting edge was extremely expensive. It was extremely tough. Just to give you an idea of how much I did that failed. That company didn't last 2 years. People were excited about the work, but they could not compare the money they needed to pay us with, first of all, how young I was, but also they couldn't see the correlation. By the time the local industry caught up, Flash was dying. In 2005, I started a multimedia company. We were doing cutting-edge 3D, 2D animation at a time when people here were still, the biggest company was VCL Studios. So no one was doing 2D animations. We were actually approached by multiple advertising agencies who wanted to buy us out because we were a threat to them. Clients wanted to work with us directly because what we were doing was so cool and so exciting that the agencies were not able to catch up. That the industry only caught up about 5 years later is when now suddenly everyone is doing 3D animation, etc. I started a blog community called Blog Spirit at the time when Uganda, I think, okay, not Uganda, of course we had more bloggers, but you'd do like a meeting and 10 bloggers would show up. You'd crawl the internet and there are like 100 bloggers. That didn't last long because, again, it was too far ahead of its time. Now there are like thousands of bloggers and there are, I think, 3 or 4 aggregators. It's tough. It's really tough. My current initiative is called Fundibots. We are basically promoting better science education in schools. What this means, I like telling people that the cool version of our story is that we teach kids how to build robots. The unsexy version is that we are helping to transform science education by teaching kids how to correlate constructing a robot with mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, and basically bringing practical science back into the classroom. I started Fundibots in 2011, and for a while, it was cool. And now is when the industry is like, oh wow, everyone is like, oh, we need to take robots to schools. We need to, there's this cool thing called robotics, called 3D printing. How do we? So I'm not trying to brag, please don't misunderstand me. I'm just trying to say that there are sacrifices that you make being on the cutting edge of technology. And some of those sacrifices determine what the output of your life and of your businesses are. I'm a huge fan of failure because pretty much, I was talking to one of the ladies from Aga Khan and she was like, we shouldn't call it failure, it should be renamed to something else. But I'm a huge fan of failing upwards, so to speak. Just keep trying. And so if I was to look back and ask myself, what would I change? What are the things that I would do to make life easier for someone like me at that time? Which is what science is about, right? It's about innovation. It's about pushing boundaries. It's about finding the things that make sense to you and hope that you can translate that to the people. But it requires making the sacrifice, basically cutting the forest and hope that people follow you. And so what would I change? 4 things. 1, I would minimize the pain. I would optimize management. I would maximize the effort. And I would equalize the playing field. What do I mean? Minimize the pain. Entrepreneurs like us need something that we call risk capital. It's basically someone willing to believe in you and say, you know what, I don't really understand what you're doing, but I think it's exciting. And I think that if we put in the right money, we can push this industry forward. Unfortunately, very many venture capitalists, especially government investors, are very averse to risk. Everyone wants to see something work before they can commit to it. And like fellow entrepreneur Sherry was saying, the work that we are doing has only been recognized by foreign organizations. I'm an Ashoka Fellow, I'm an Echo in Green Fellow. We've been supported by Google. We have been supported by Seagull Family Foundation. All of these are external. Yeah? When you talk to someone locally here, they're like, yeah, you first go and try it. Let's first see how it works. No one really believes in what you're doing. Entrepreneurs like us need to we need to find ways to minimize the pain, the startups, the hustle of getting businesses off the ground. taxes, etc. They've talked a lot about that, so I'll not rehash that. Secondly, maximize efforts. Many of us are hardcore techies. We like to think we're building the next Facebook or the next WhatsApp. That's amazing. But if you're not a businessman, find the right partnerships. Find someone who can take your business to the next level from the marketing and from the sales perspective. Find partnerships in places like this. Find people that can help you scale globally, and find ways in which you can leverage those connections. Optimize management. I just recently closed one of my companies, and I'm doing what I like to call an autopsy, which is basically just trying to break things apart and see what went wrong. And I can confidently say that 90% of businesses here, all these entrepreneurs, Uganda's most entrepreneurial, 90% of the problem is management. Things like hiring the wrong people and not figuring out when you should fire those wrong people, mismanaging finances, just a whole lot of stuff that you can see, but somehow because there is not a lot of pressure from investors or board members, you just let it pass. Customer care, etc. We know the stories, and I think that if we fix that, we'll make progress. Equalize the playing field. This is a policy and advocacy thing. Basically, it's about how do we get the government to support us? I don't want to rehash this. There was an entire panel that talked about that. I was like, these guys have stolen my talk. But yeah, about policies. How do we get the support that we need to bring this to the level where we need to get it to? And so I think that the internet is a great equalizer. I think that we can use these resources to leverage scale, because everything that you can do here, the internet gives you the permission and authority to take it as global as possible. So even if you're a trailblazer, if there are ways in which you can leverage, optimize, and find ways to equalize, you'll definitely be on the right track. Thank you for your time.